Hello, everybody. Okay, this is part one of a little series I want to do of vlogs called Who Rules the World? Now, because this is an astrology channel and I do a lot of predictions, including geopolitical ones, elections, social trends, just looking at where we as a human race are heading and the kind of influences from the planets, what they could mean. And I think in order to do that, we need context. And while I used to focus a lot on predicting the outcome of elections, I think it's become increasingly clear to all of us now, to more and more people, that it really doesn't matter because it's the people behind pulling the strings and they're controlling both sides. So in order to know what's really going on, we need to kind of rip the veil asunder and see who really controls things. What are the driving forces? Now, I find it a little bit vague actually, because you'll watch David Icke and he'll talk about the cabal, the clique, the spider, and then even Alexei Bugnolo, he talks about there's about 30 families, he'll say. Other people will talk about Satanism, Satanists. People will talk about the Illuminati or the Zionists or the Rosicrucians, or gosh, there's a whole lot of different words people use, and I just find it very confusing because who the hell are these people? I want to know, and I'm sure you want to know too, and that's why I wanted to bring you this, because I think it's kind of interesting, and I'm hoping to bring you a certain some information you might not have seen elsewhere, and I'm going to try and build on it through this series. In part two of this, do watch, it's rather interesting. It's a little bit repetitive, but I think you'll be rather surprised at what we uncover in that, and it's provided us with further investigative tools and food for thought going forward. So what I've got up on the picture here, we're going to have a look at. Okay, now the Council of 300, that's what I've got written there in red, C of 300, is an extremely important body. Where did it evolve from? It evolved from the nobility of Venice, Genoa, then into London, would have been Antwerp when that was a financial capital. So that's where it evolved from. Essentially, it was the aristocracy and the royalty of Europe who held all the wealth and therefore all the power. Now, it seems to me that while Prince Rainier of Monaco is in this Council of 300, it seems to be dominated by more the Protestant royalty. And I think that was where the initial power grid was. And how did they cement that power? They did it through colonialization, through slavery, through the opium trade, through building the railways across America, which I'll come back to just now, and through mining. That was the traditional way. Now we've kind of moved away from that towards it being more tech-based, social media-based, that bioengineering, everything that Klaus Schwab talks about. So we've moved kind of in that direction. So after Queen Victoria, the aristocracy kind of realized that they weren't very hands-on. I mean, we had this emerging middle class, the Industrial Revolution. The kind of brains were now in the emerging middle class, where people were wheeling and dealing, they knew the tricks of the trade, they were wily, they were streetwise, they understood finance. This is where the Rothschilds come in. This is how they gained their power. They kind of were helped along by the Oppenheimers, who did banking in Hanover. But the Rothschilds developed their power, like Angela Rothschild, because he became the banker to the aristocracy, to the elites. Because you can imagine, the elites were out of touch. They had the money, but they didn't really have a clue what was going on. So they needed the help of more streetwise, financially orientated people like the Rothschilds. The Rockefellers were a sort of offshoot of the Rothschilds. I find many of these key people trace back to Germany. That's why the Bavarian Illuminati and that, who spawned the Skull and Bones in Yale, also very, very important. But London is a key focus for all this activity. Talking about the Illuminati, it's really apt that we should discuss it, because like America had its birthday in 1776, the Illuminati also was established in 1776, which means they're also having a Pluto return in very much the same way. America is having a Pluto return. What could that mean? Is this now the apex of their power or their downfall? And I know a lot of us are hoping it's going to be their downfall, because I feel what's going on now is so risky for them. statistics. They're waking up more and more people. So that's why they've got to move things extremely quickly now, right, to see what happens. So I'm going to be revealing a couple of names to you of people in this Council of 300. Now, I must credit here John Coleman, former MI5 and MI6, and he's got quite an interesting background. I've looked at this book. Now, it is 30 years out of date, which is why I am going to try and use the information and the techniques to bring it all up to date. So I have got a couple of names there of people who were in this Council of 300, the body of most important people or families that rule the world, and that's based on what is written in this book. But of course, I'm going to be trying to, improve on that. Got to put my power on there. So what's very important to this? One of the main things is the Royal Institute of International Affairs, better known as Chatham House, based out of London. You might have heard of the Chatham House rules, where you could report what was said, but not who said it, and it's supposed to increase the ability of people to speak freely. It is rather secretive. Have had a look at it. Not too many people emerging that we can speak about yet, but very central is also the Council of Foreign Relations and its links to the Brookings Institute. Now, anyone who's involved in NATO and the Council of Foreign Relations is bound to be either in the Council of 300 or closely connected. And one such person is Javier Solana, who used to be head of NATO. Key also is the Skull and Bones. It's a kind of elite group at Yale University, and I will be looking at them and all the people who've emerged from the Skull and Bones, because that's rather interesting as well. And although we don't have a full list, we can kind of guess who the others were. There's a similar scheme called The Group at Oxford University. Not sure if that's got a new name now or still exists, but you can imagine that while Skull and Bones were picking key people in from Yale, there must have been something similar at Oxford to collect the cream of the crop in terms of the brains and make sure that they were on board with the agenda of the Council of 300. I mean, what is their agenda? It's simple. They're very geared to communism and through that, feudalism. They're very communitarian ideas. They are obviously globalists, and they are in the main eugenicists. They are interested in any ideology which can cement their control and increase the gap between themselves and the rest of us. There's also an interesting secret group called Kappa Beta Phi, as in the Greek. We'll be looking at that as well. And the Club of Rome. Now, the Club of Rome were historically very, very important. And some of the key people that molded the Council of 300 or were in it were in the Club of Rome. But looking more recently at the makeup of the Club of Rome, I'm inclined to believe that there's a front organization which the public sees, and there's a lot of people doing certain things, mainly around climate and population, and then there's a more secretive group who we don't know about. So I think they've made a distinction because possibly Club of Rome is too high profile now, and people are looking at it and they don't want them looking at it, so they've sort of got a front group to kind of fend off the questions. And the Tavistock Institute, similar to the Club of Rome, I feel that they've got a front group with the website and the Wikipedia page that you can look at, and all looks fairly benign, right? But we know that they were key in terms of psychology and the development of psychology for mass control, manipulation, in order to help the Council of 300 control the masses who were kind of getting more uppity and out of control, I guess. Very important too is the Stanford Research Center. You'll all know the Stanford experiment. I might talk about it a little bit later. And we have their RAND Corporation, very important to this whole setup. Now, the key companies which I've discussed, and you'll be interested to have a look at in terms of how this operates on a stockholding financial level. You've got your BlackRock, Larry Fink, Blackstone, that's Schwartzman, he's Skull and Bones. You've also got Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, FMC, JP Morgan, Wellington, private company, Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett, who's part of Kappa Beta Pi, and State Street. So all these companies are key, and you can imagine that the people in the Council of 300 have large shareholdings or influences on those companies because they own a bit of everything, but that's in part two. You've also got your private trusts. Now, when you see Forbes magazine and they tell you, oh, well, Bill Gates is the richest man in the world, or it's Jeff Bezos. No, wrong. That's the richest person that you're allowed to hear about. But a vast amount of wealth accumulated over the many centuries within the aristocracy is held in private trusts. And the little islands of Jersey, Cayman, and Isle of Man possibly, and these are key to where those sort of trusts are buried secretly, away from the eyes of people. So they parade these billionaires for us to see, like Gates, etc. But they're not the real power. So who are the 13 Illuminati families, who I'll come to probably later? We've got Rothschild, an offshoot of that is Sassoon, Rockefeller, Astor. You'll remember I talked about Astor when I did the similarities between Jeffrey Epstein, the whole Jeffrey Epstein saga, and the Michael Profumo affair. Got the DuPonts, Russell, very interesting, because they strongly linked to Skull and Bones, and through that to Planned Parenthood. Got the Lee family, China, Kennedy, Disney, McDonald, Collins, Bundy, Oppenheimer. Now, it seems that back 25, 30 years ago, all of this Council of 300, apart from the Queens, were men. So I'm not sure how that has changed, but I can imagine it's changed, and I can imagine it's more diverse, because at that time it was particularly European, maybe Protestant, yeah. And these people are not necessarily hiding away. They are people in the public eye, and I think it's time that I reveal to you a couple of them. So one of the very important ones, which you probably haven't heard much of, but you would have heard me mentioned when I talked in my video called Why Capitalists Love Communism, is Averell Harriman. Now, Harriman, who later went on to form Brown Brothers Harriman, is a key person in history. He's passed now, but he along with Arnie Hammer, who I'll come to, funded and steered the Bolshevik Revolution as part of the Council of 300's plan to run that whole experiment in the Soviet Union. So he was key to that. He was key to funding Hitler. So you can see the biggest events in terms of the 20th century, the World War II, and how that led to the League of Nations, and from that led to the UN, which is kind of the incubator for a one world government, which they want. That came from that. And also the whole experiment of the Soviet Union, because one of the key things the Council of 300 do is they have this thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So they know that the way to get the result they want is to have two opposing forces, and they control both of them. Democrats versus Republicans, Brexit, Remain, all these forces, Cold War, United States versus Soviet Union. They've always got to have these apparently opposing forces so they can divide people, but through the division and through what they can engineer with the conflict, they drive it towards a goal. So you've always got to be careful, because, for example, Harriman was a huge funder of the Democrat Party, and yet George Bush, I've forgotten his name, the not Herbert Walker Bush, the other one had a name with a P, anyway, the father of Herbert Walker Bush, he worked for Brown Brothers Harriman, right? And as I say, they were key to the funding of World War II. So Harriman was absolutely central, and Kissinger, who was a part of the Council of 300, took over from Harriman. We've also got people like Ford, and we know Ford Motor Company, immense wealth. He really pushed a lot of agendas. He was involved with also behind the scenes with the Soviet Union, supplying them, helping with all their motor cars, motor vehicles, etc. And as you know, Hitler had a picture of him up on the wall. So Ford, a key person. We have royalty in there, all right. They're in there. I'll come to them more in another thing. Now, Rothschilds have kind of, from 300 years ago, maybe a bit less, have edged their way in there, and I think they could be mounting a takeover. I just kind of get the idea that, can't prove this, but that the Council of 300 was originally a lot of aristocracy and royalty, but I think the nouveau riche who are involved in banking are edging them out a little bit, and they're becoming less important. You've also got people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, who came from Polish nobility, and as you know, he was Council of Foreign Relations. He wrote the Grand Chessboard. He was a key architect of the geopolitics we see today. He was in there. Winston Churchill was in there, but I feel he was not a ranking member, because the attitudes he expressed in writing about what was going on with the Bolsheviks seemed to display to me a lack of understanding that people like Harriman were pulling the strings, right? So in that way, I think maybe Churchill wasn't very high up. We've got people like, obviously I mentioned Kissinger, Rockefeller as well, Ted Turner of CNN, Warren Buffett in there. What have I got written there? H-O. Now, who was that? I've forgotten my own. I'll have to investigate. You guys can just guess who CJR and HO are, because I've forgotten temporarily who those people are. I've also got their MS. Well, anyway, while I try and remember whose names they stand for. Oh, by the way, you might be interested to know in the UK that Maggie Thatcher wasn't, because, as I said, not many women in there, apart from the royalty. But now his name escapes me as well. Anyway, you know the politician, Heseltine, Michael Heseltine, is a member. Sir Geoffrey Howe as well, who was a Chancellor of the Exchequer at some point. Let's quickly look at a story that's made the news recently. Now, I'm not a movie buff, but apparently there's a rather good-looking actor called Armie Hammer, and he's come into the news lately. It says here, the Hammer House of Horror. Actor Armie Hammer stands accused of sexual depravity, but then he is heir to a millionaire dynasty of hellraisers who reveled in perversion, drugs, and violence. And this story goes on to talk about sadomasochism and cannibalism even. I mean, look, it sounds to me it's Satanism, but they're dancing around that actual word. So it seems that there's something rather peculiar going on in the world of the Hammers. But Armie Hammer, his grandfather, Armie Hammer, of the same name, but not as good looking, was also an extremely rich. He came out of the Soviet Union. He immigrated to America, made his fortune, and along with Harriman was key in funding and being an architect of the development of the Soviet Union, the Bolshevik Revolution, the getting rid of the royals. So his grandfather was either in the Council of 300 or very, very close to it, because there you go, we have another. So there you are, there's the family, and there is the slight hint that when a lot of people say that Satanism is at the heart of this, it could well be. Okay, for you South Africans, I think it was the first president of the Union of South Africa, anyway, Jan Smuts was also part of this Council of 300, Committee of 300. What's interesting is I do remember a story told by Michael Tellinger that there was a battle going on in South Africa during the Boer War, a very important battle. And up on a hill overlooking the battle, 3 people had a meeting, and those 3 people went on. It was in I don't know, don't get me on the date here. It was before 1910, but it's kind of around there. And these 3 people, well, who were they? They were Churchill, who was a journalist at the time, covering the Boer War. The other one was Gandhi, who'd gone out to South Africa to work on the sugarcane fields. And the other was Jan Smuts. So we know all those 3 people. They must have been earmarked at that very important battle, whatever the meeting was between them. Seems to indicate to me that they were all in the know and knew that they would all play a vital part in history in their respective countries. So there you go. I still haven't remembered who that CJR is. Crazy. And HO, Harry Oppenheimer. For you guys in South Africa, you'll know Anglo-American Harry Oppenheimer. That's the HO. Those are all members. And we will return to this, and I hope you guys enjoy that, and I hope it cleared a few things up about. Now, this is by no means exhaustive. There's many other institutes and think tanks, from the Hoover Institute to goodness knows what. There's a lot of them around, and to give you some examples of the other important think tanks which are linked to this whole setup and form its tentacles, we've got the German Marshall Fund, the Atlantic Council, the Aspen Institute, Ford Foundation, and the Heritage Foundation. But there are many, many of them, but I've isolated what I see as the most important ones for you there. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. Take care.